This is the narrated PowerPoint on writing definitions. So why write definitions? We might consider the way that words have changed over time. Consider the word dial, for example. For the ancient Romans, it was a device for telling time. It was an outdoor installation. Because it was a device for telling time, when we were able to build mechanical clocks, it became the face of the clock. And then was translated to the dial of a watch. Can you see what technology is doing here? It's miniaturizing. Today, we tell time most often for looking for some numerals in the corner of our cell phone screen or computer screen. But around the beginning of the 20th century, you also had the development of the term radio dial. And possibly because it was circular and it could be moved actually either clockwise or counterclockwise. We also had the telephone dial develop around the same time. And of course, if you've ever used one, perhaps at your grandparents' or great-grandparents' house, do you remember the direction your finger was moving? Well, the direction it was moving was clockwise. Today, we're constantly being told to dial 1-800 by our televisions. And we're not even moving in that clockwise direction usually anymore. Unusual when we would be, we'd have that series of numbers. But you notice what's happened to the word dial. When it started out as a sundial, it was a noun. Now, when we're being told to dial 1-800, it's a verb. So that's just one of many reasons for defining words. So now that we have dictionaries and everything, are words now stable? Take a word like triangle. It's what we think of as a good scientific word, in that if you do look it up in the dictionary, you'll see it has one and only one definition. Something like this, which you may have memorized when you took high school geometry. But what happens when we talk about a lover's triangle? That's when you have three people who are romantically involved. One of them may not know about it. Or take another word like test tube. Again, you look it up in the dictionary, you'll find usually one definition, something like this. What's a test tube baby? Is that a little baby test tube? No, that's a term we use to describe when a child is conceived outside the mother's womb. So words are not stable, and for that reason, it's a good idea to define them, especially when we're going to use them in a particular way in a document. So to write a definition, you carry out these three steps. In terms of analyzing the writing situation, really just like with any writing situation, you think about your audience, you think about who your reader is going to be, what they may know or not know in terms of their background. Then you determine the appropriate definition, and there are a number of different kinds that we'll talk about in just a few minutes. And then you decide where to place the definition, and there are a number of different places you can put definitions. So to start with, this is one type of definition. I refer to it as a parenthetical definition. And with the parenthetical definition, I differentiate between simple parenthetical, like this one, Pilotfish have a symbiotic, mutually beneficial relationship with sharks. The pilotfish are the ones who swim around sharks and pick little organisms off of them, off their skin. Sounds like a dangerous job, but the sharks tolerate it. But they have a symbiotic relationship with the sharks, and so it's defined there as mutually beneficial. And so the writer is thinking here that most of the readers of this document or this sentence would not know what symbiotic meant, but they would know what mutually beneficial would mean. So that's simple parenthetical in that the definition, sometimes it may just be a synonym, is in parentheses, literally. Well, we also have what I call complex parenthetical, and it can make use of definitions or not. In this example, you see that what we're defining here is the Jamesport estuary. And the definition follows the comma after estuary, and that's a good deal longer. And it's also complex in the sense of the syntax of the definition. With the simple parenthetical, that was just a phrase. This one, we have following Jamesport estuary, we have the portion is a noun, then of the bay, that's a prepositional phrase modifying portion, and then that meets the mouth is an adjective clause modifying bay, and then of the Jamesport River is a prepositional phrase modifying mouth. So this is syntactically complex, and syntax, when I'm talking about syntax, I'm talking about the syntax of a sentence, its structure. Simple sentences versus compound sentences versus compound complex sentences. An example of a simple sentence would be one independent clause. A compound sentence is two independent clauses linked by a coordinating conjunction, and a compound complex is at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. Anyway, those are some examples of definitions. So our theory for writing definitions goes back to the ancient Greeks, and it goes back to Aristotle. In the middle, that's supposed to be Plato and Aristotle in the Greek Forum. This painting was painted hundreds of years later. But according to Aristotle, we can break a term down to be defined into three categories: the species, the genus, and the differentia. The species is what's to be defined. The genus is the general category into which it fits, and the differentia is how it differs from other items in that category. So we might say, for example, that a squirrel is a mammal that lives in a tree or something like that. How is it different from apes? Not a great example, but I've got some others that are better. I hope you see the general idea. Let's get a little more specific. So we have a flip-flop is. What is a flip-flop? I see that term, and the first thing I think of is a rubber shoe I might wear to the beach. Wait a minute, a flip-flop is a circuit. It's a little bit different. This is something electrical. And so we need the differentia to tell us how it's different and to fully define it and to better understand it. So there it is. A flip-flop is a circuit that can assume either one of two stable states at any given time. And I'm still thinking, well, what type of a circuit is this? What are we talking about? Is this like a circuit board on a computer? Well, maybe, but another good example would be just simply a light switch. It's either on or it's off. So that's one of two stable states. And so that's species, genus, and differentia to define this term. And this is a good example of kind of a general term. We understand flip, we understand flop, we understand flip-flop, we think, but it does have a particular application. Very often you may be asked to write an extended definition. I was working on my doctoral dissertation. I was asked to differentiate between scientific communication and technical communication. So I had to do an extended definition to explain what they were, how they were like, and how they were different. It took me several pages. They don't have to be that long. And here are some ways to develop an extended definition. Examples, taking it and dividing it into parts. That's kind of like what we're doing with the species, genus, and differentia. But we could also define birds and divide it into a lot of different parts, or reptiles or something like that, and divide it in many different types of reptiles. Principal operation, we can tell how it works. Comparison contrast, you're kind of getting towards metaphor, but you could do more of an objective comparison and contrast without really getting so much into to metaphor. And then etymology, that's what we were doing with the word dial. The history of a word can sometimes be a way to develop an extended definition. Here's another one. It's just one sentence. Why would it be an extended definition? If you're thinking, well, it's an extended definition because in this sentence there are actually three definitions, you're right. We have a definition of form. We also have definitions of small scale features and large scale features through the use of examples. Places we can place definitions, we've talked about doing the parenthetical definitions, which would be in the text. You can also do, you can define a word in a footnote. And Microsoft Word makes it easy to insert footnotes in your work. Back in olden times, you used to have to estimate the number of lines you would need and then use a ruler to determine how much space you would need. You can also use a glossary. And when you think of the term glossary in terms of where it would be, you think, well, that'll be in the back. Well, not necessarily. A glossary could be at the beginning of a document, especially if you think the primary readers will need to understand the terms defined there in order to make sense of the document that follows. You could conceivably still put it in the appendix, though, if you wanted to, if you think the primary audience will understand the words, but there is a secondary audience that may need these definitions. And so there can conceivably be problems with definitions. One we want to avoid is negative definitions. For example, with this one, in a legal transaction, real property is not personal property. Well, it doesn't tell us what real property is. It just tells us what it isn't. Actually, it probably would be useful to define personal property as well. Well, this definition could be improved. In a legal transaction, real property is land and structures upon it. And we think, aha, real property is real estate, land and buildings. We always want to be sure to write in plain English, especially when the audience that we're writing for is a general one. How about a solenoid as an inductance coil that serves as attractive? Probably clear as mud for at least some of you, if not most, or even all. How about if we rewrote this as a solenoid is an electrically energized coil that converts electrical energy to magnetic energy capable of performing mechanical functions? So that defines inductance coil for us, and it also covers that concept of serving as attractive. We also want to avoid circular definitions, which is kind of like circular reasoning, if you're familiar with that concept from logic. But anyway, if we wrote something like spontaneous combustion is fire that begins spontaneously, a good rule of thumb here is not to use the words you're trying to define in the definition. And in this case, spontaneous combustion. Spontaneous is an adjective and combustion is a noun, but we're trying to define that concept. It would work better if we wrote it in the second instance. There's a lot more attention to process in the second one. You also want to be sure to be specific. With this one, I mean, with a term like safety can, we probably safety might be a word that's on a list of words known by fourth grade children or something. There are such words, I mean, such lists out there that exist, and so is the word can. And when we put them together, safety can, we still understand it. But if the definition is something like this, where it does have these specifications and it's not more than 5 gallons and it has a spring closing spout, then that would need to be included for us to have a complete understanding of what this term means. So remember, use definitions to clarify terms for your audience, consider the type that will be most effective, and then decide where to put it, where it will do the most good. Questions? I'll see you online.